The room erupted with laughter as elite Navy SEALs mocked the female veteran's faded tattoo. "Nice souvenir," one sneered, as she stood silently enduring their ridicule. Her presence at this high-level briefing was clearly unwelcome. Then the decorated general, who had been watching from the corner, slowly approached. Without a word, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing the identical tattoo. The laughter instantly died. Every SEAL froze, faces draining of color, as they realized the terrible mistake they had just made. The Air and Naval Special Warfare Command's briefing room was charged with unspoken tension as Major Elise Harrington organized her presentation materials at the podium. Around her, rows of Navy SEALs in crisp uniforms shifted restlessly, their skepticism evident before she had spoken a single word. The windowless room, designed for classified briefings, felt particularly oppressive today, under the weight of so many judgmental stares. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and measured, "thank you for the opportunity to present the Lazarus Protocol. This battlefield trauma management system could increase survival rates by 64% in scenarios where medevac is delayed beyond the golden hour." Commander Riker, seated in the front row, made a show of checking his watch. At 38, with multiple combat deployments behind him, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being the most lethal person in any room. His teammates exchanged knowing glances, the kind that pass between men who have faced death together and formed bonds that outsiders could never penetrate. Elise was undeniably an outsider here. "The protocol integrates 3 primary innovations," she continued, advancing to a slide showing a complex diagram of emergency surgical interventions. First, a modified application of self-clotting compounds directly to compromised arterial structures. As she spoke, her passion for the material broke through her professional demeanor. This wasn't simply academic for her. The precision in her voice carried the weight of experience, though nothing in her presentation directly referenced personal combat exposure. "And you field-tested this? Where exactly, Major?" Riker interrupted, emphasizing her rank in a way that suggested he found it unearned. "The protocol has been validated in multiple combat simulations and extensive field hospital data analysis from forward operating bases," she replied. "Simulations," Riker cut her off, earning subtle nods from his team. "SEALs operate in realities, not simulations." Elise paused, reassessing the room. In the back sat General Marcus Thornhill, a legendary figure in special operations circles. Unlike the others, his weathered face revealed nothing as he observed both her presentation and the SEAL's reaction to it. When their eyes briefly met, something unspoken passed between them. Not recognition exactly, but something deeper and more complex. "Reality, Commander Riker," she continued smoothly, "includes a 23% mortality rate from preventable hemorrhagic shock in special operations casualties. The Lazarus Protocol addresses the primary factors in that statistic." As she demonstrated a modified tourniquet application, rolling up her sleeve to use her own arm, a faded geometric tattoo became visible on her forearm. Unusual interconnected triangles within a circle. Lieutenant Bracken, a younger SEAL with a reputation for sharp tactical thinking and sharper wit, noticed first, nudging his teammates and smirking. Whispers began, just loud enough for Elise to hear, but not quite loud enough to address directly. "If you look at the pressure distribution," she continued, ignoring the murmurs, "you'll notice this creates a more effective seal while maintaining peripheral circulation to viable tissue." The whispers grew, accompanied now by barely suppressed laughter. These elite warriors clearly saw her as an interloper attempting to instruct them on matters of life and death. Their domain, not hers. The tattoo had somehow confirmed whatever assumptions they had made about her from the moment she entered the room. One seal whispered to another, "Bet she got that at some mall tattoo shop. Probably thinks it makes her look tough." Another replied, just audible enough, "Stolen valor. Classic desk jockey trying to look the part." As the presentation concluded, Commander Riker's dismissive, "Thank you for your time, Major," felt like a door slamming shut on her program before it ever had a chance. General Thornhill departed without comment, leaving Elise to gather her materials alone as the SEALs filed out, several making pointed comments just within earshot. "Well, that's an hour of combat readiness training we'll never get back. Did you see that tattoo? Probably watched a few too many war movies." Elise maintained perfect composure, her face revealing nothing as she methodically organized her materials. Only the slightest tightening around her eyes betrayed any awareness of the comments. Later that day, in this officer's mess hall, Elise sat alone, methodically eating her meal while reviewing notes on her tablet. The isolation was clearly deliberate. Empty chairs surrounded her while other tables were full, the arrangement too perfect to be coincidental. Nearby, Riker held court with his team, their laughter occasionally spiking in volume when they glanced her way. They weren't even trying to hide their mockery. Lieutenant Bracken approached her table, ostensibly to refill his water glass at the nearby station. "That's quite the fashion statement, Major," he said, nodding toward her partially visible tattoo. "Let me guess. Got it after watching some documentary about special ops." Elise didn't respond, but something flashed in her eyes. Not hurt, but something harder and more controlled. Bracken continued, louder now, ensuring others could hear. "The guys and I were just wondering what motivated you to get a tattoo of the Valknut. Seems a little presumptuous for someone who's never seen actual combat." This drew more attention, and several SEALs drifted closer, sensing entertainment. "I don't recall discussing my combat experience, Lieutenant," Elise responded, her voice measured. "You didn't have to," Riker joined in, approaching her table. "Your presentation made it obvious. No one who's been downrange talks about battlefield medicine like it's a science project." The mockery escalated as more SEALs gathered, emboldened by their commander's participation. One mimicked her precise speaking style to appreciative laughter. Another suggested the tattoo must be military cosplay for desk officers wanting to feel special. Throughout it all, Elise remained composed, though her knuckles whitened around her fork. When she finally stood to leave, Riker delivered what he believed was the final blow. "Next time the brass wants to improve SEAL medical protocols, maybe they could send someone who's actually been in the field." As Elise turned to leave, her sleeve rolled up further, revealing more of the tattoo and a significant scar that ran beneath it. Captain Adira Levesque, one of the few female officers present, noticed this and furrowed her brow in recognition, suddenly uncertain. "Wait, that pattern?" Levesque began, but was drowned out by the continuing laughter. Unknown to the group, General Thornhill had entered the mess hall and stood in the doorway, observing everything. His face remained impassive, but his eyes tracked Elise as she walked out with perfect posture, refusing to be diminished. That evening, alone in her temporary quarters, Elise methodically reviewed her presentation materials for the next day. Nothing in her demeanor suggested the mockery had affected her. If anything, she seemed more focused, more determined. When her phone rang, she answered with a crisp, "Major Harrington." "They're not ready for it." General Thornhill's voice came through. "But they need it, just like in Kavashk." Elise's expression changed at the mention of that name, a location that appeared on no public maps. Kavashk was different. "We didn't have a choice." "Neither do they. They just don't know it yet," Thornhill replied. "Is this really necessary, Marcus? The protocol could be implemented without all this." "You know better than that," Thornhill said. "These men follow warriors, not briefings. Until they respect the source, they won't truly implement the methods." I didn't come here for respect, Elise countered. No, but you came here for results. And sometimes respect is a prerequisite for results. After the call ended, Elise rolled up her sleeve and traced the outline of the geometric tattoo, her fingers lingering on the scar beneath it. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing something the mocking seals would never have expected. Not hurt or anger, but the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen things that had forever changed them. She opened a small case containing her personal items and removed a worn photograph, its edges softened from frequent handling. It showed a 6-person team in unmarked combat gear against a barren mountain backdrop. Their faces were purposely turned away from the camera, but each forearm displayed the same geometric tattoo she bore. She looked at the image for a long moment before carefully returning it to the case. The next morning, she arrived at the briefing room precisely 15 minutes early to set up her materials. As she arranged her presentation, Captain Levesque entered, hesitating briefly at the door. "Major Harrington, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Captain," Elise replied. Levesque glanced around the empty room before speaking in a lowered voice. "That tattoo, it's not a Valknut, is it?" Elise's expression remained carefully neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean." "My brother was intelligence support for classified operations. He mentioned a symbol once, a geometric design used by a team that officially didn't exist." For a moment, it seemed Elise might acknowledge the implicit question. Instead, she simply said, "Your brother should be more careful with operational security, Captain." Levesque continued, undeterred. "He said the team had the highest mission success rate in special operations history, but the records were sealed at the highest levels. He also mentioned their combat medic once saved 4 operators who should have died by any medical standard." Elise met her gaze directly. "Captain, I appreciate your interest, but my presentation begins soon. Was there something specific about the Lazarus Protocol you wanted to discuss?" Before Levesque could respond, SEALs began filing into the room, their expressions making it clear that yesterday's mockery was set to continue. Lieutenant Bracken made a particular show of rolling up his own sleeve and pointing to a tribal band tattoo, earning laughs from his teammates. Commander Riker entered last, his confident stride faltering slightly when he noticed Captain Levesque engaged in conversation with Elise. As he approached his seat, he nodded formally to Levesque while pointedly ignoring Elise. "Captain, I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." "Just observing, Commander," Levesque replied. "The Lazarus Protocol has potential applications across multiple special operations units." "If you say so," Riker replied, his tone making his skepticism clear. "Though I think our time might be better spent on practical combat medicine, rather than theoretical exercises." As the room filled, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The SEALs clearly expected a continuation of yesterday's entertainment at Elise's expense. What they didn't expect was General Thornhill entering and taking a seat in the front row, rather than his previous position at the back of the room. His presence immediately altered the dynamic, the SEALs' postures straightening instinctively in the presence of senior command. Thornhill's reputation preceded him. 40 years of service, with more combat deployments than most of them combined. The ribbons on his chest told a story of valor that even these elite operators could only aspire to. As Elise prepared to begin, Bracken couldn't resist one final jab, speaking loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Nice tattoo yesterday, Major. Very authentic looking. Almost like you've actually been in the field." Several SEALs snickered, but their laughter died abruptly as General Thornhill turned slowly in his seat, fixing Bracken with a look that had made hardened combat veterans tremble. "Lieutenant," Thornhill said quietly, his voice nonetheless carrying throughout the now silent room, Perhaps you'd care to share with everyone what's so amusing about Major Harrington's presentation materials. Sir, I was just... Bracken fumbled for words, clearly caught off guard by the General's direct intervention. I was simply commenting on the Major's tattoo, sir. I see, Thornhill replied, his gaze unwavering. And you find this relevant to the battlefield trauma protocols being presented? The room held its collective breath as Bracken struggled to respond. The easy mockery of earlier had evaporated in the face of Thornhill's quiet intensity. No relevant reason, sir, Bracken finally admitted. Then perhaps we could focus on the material at hand, Thornhill suggested. Though everyone present understood it wasn't a suggestion at all. As Elise began her presentation again, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The overt mockery had been suppressed, but the underlying skepticism remained. What none of the SEALs realized was that this measured intervention was only the prelude to what General Thornhill had planned for them, a lesson in judgment they would never forget. The SEALs reassembled for Day 2 of medical protocol reviews, the atmosphere tense following General Thornhill's unexpected intervention. Though no longer openly mocking, their skepticism remained evident in subtle exchanges of glances whenever Elise referenced field applications of her techniques. The Lazarus Protocol incorporates a modified approach to tension pneumothorax, Elise explained, displaying a detailed diagram of chest anatomy. Traditional needle decompression has a failure rate of approximately 38% in combat conditions. This modified technique reduces that to under 12%. Commander Riker raised his hand with exaggerated formality. Major Harrington, these statistics are impressive on paper, but my concern remains implementation under actual combat stress. Simulations rarely capture the chaos of a real firefight. His question, though professionally phrased, carried the same dismissive undertone as yesterday's more overt mockery. Several of his team nodded in agreement. A valid concern, Commander, Elise acknowledged. The protocol includes simplified decision trees specifically designed for high-stress environments where cognitive function may be compromised. Lieutenant Bracken, still smarting from Thornhill's rebuke, but unable to resist pushing the boundaries, spoke up. Decision trees are great in training environments, Major, but when bullets are flying and you're covered in your teammates' blood, theoretical approaches tend to go out the window, which is precisely why the protocol emphasizes muscle memory and instinctive response patterns rather than complex decision-making. Elise countered smoothly. The same principles that guide your tactical training apply to emergency medical response. As she rolled up her sleeve to demonstrate a technique for one-handed tourniquet application, the geometric tattoo on her forearm became visible again. This time, rather than open mockery, it provoked quiet whispers among the SEALs. Bracken, emboldened by his teammates' tacit support and careful to keep his voice just low enough that Thornhill might not hear from his position at the front, leaned toward the SEAL beside him. Should I get a Valknut too? Do you think that would make me a real warrior? The whispered comment drew suppressed laughter from those nearby, the tension in the room finding release in this return to yesterday's mockery, albeit more discreetly executed. Elise continued her demonstration, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent of disrespect. Note the pressure point location. Proper placement is critical for arterial occlusion while minimizing nerve damage. As the presentation progressed, the SEALs' attention began to fragment. Some continued to exchange subtle jabs at Elise's expense, while others found themselves reluctantly impressed by the technical aspects of the protocol, despite their skepticism about its source. General Thornhill observed it all with inscrutable patience, his weathered features revealing nothing of his thoughts. Captain Levesque, seated near him, occasionally glanced between the general and Elise with growing curiosity. During a brief break, Riker approached Thornhill while Elise reviewed her materials at the podium. General, with all due respect, Is there a particular reason this presentation was prioritized over tactical training? My team is scheduled for deployment in 3 weeks, and while medical protocols are important, our time might be better spent on mission-specific preparation. Thornhill studied Riker for a moment before responding. Commander, in your last deployment, how many casualties did your team sustain? 2 wounded, sir. Both successfully evacuated. And the mission before that? 3 wounded, 1 critical. In the past 18 months, Special Operations units have experienced a 27% increase in combat casualties, Thornhill stated. More significantly, we've seen a 14% rise in preventable fatalities. That's operators dying who didn't need to die. Commander, the Lazarus Protocol addresses that specific issue. I understand the importance, sir, Riker conceded. I'm simply questioning whether Major Harrington is the right person to implement it. Her approach seems more academic than practical. And you've determined this based on what assessment exactly? Thornhill asked, his voice remaining conversational, though his eyes hardened slightly. Sir, it's evident she lacks field experience. The way she presents the material, the focus on statistics rather than practical application. And frankly, that tattoo she's sporting tells me she's trying too hard to fit into a world she doesn't understand. Thornhill's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. An interesting analysis, Commander. We'll address that concern shortly. As the session resumed, Elise moved to the practical application portion of her presentation. I'll now demonstrate the modified surgical airway technique that forms the core of the Lazarus Protocol's respiratory management component. She called for a volunteer, and after an uncomfortable silence, Captain Levesque stood and approached the demonstration table. Elise guided her through the procedure using a high-fidelity medical simulator, her instructions precise and confident. Note the landmarks, she explained to the room. Traditional cricothyroidotomy approaches have a high complication rate in field conditions. This modified approach reduces the risk of posterior wall perforation by approximately 62%. As Levesque successfully completed the procedure, genuine interest began to overcome skepticism among some of the SEALs. The technique was undeniably elegant in its simplicity and clearly designed with combat conditions in mind. Lieutenant Bracken, however, remained determined to undermine Elise's authority. When she called for questions, he raised his hand with exaggerated eagerness. Major, I'm curious about your tattoo. Actually, the Valknut is a Norse symbol associated with fallen warriors. Is there a particular reason you chose that symbol, or was it just the coolest-looking option at the tattoo parlor? The question, deliberately phrased to sound innocent while carrying an obvious insult, caused several SEALs to suppress smiles. Others, however, shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the inappropriate nature of the question in a professional briefing. Before Elise could respond, General Thornhill stood and moved to the front of the room. His deliberate pace and the sudden intensity of his presence immediately silenced any remaining amusement. Lieutenant Bracken seems particularly fixated on Major Harrington's tattoo, Thornhill observed, his voice deceptively casual. Since it's become such a point of interest, perhaps we should address it directly before continuing. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as Thornhill turned to face the assembled SEALs, his expression now deadly serious. The symbol on Major Harrington's arm is not a Valknut, Lieutenant. Your cultural ignorance is the least of your mistakes today. Thornhill slowly rolled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo identical to Elise's. The same geometric pattern, though his remained darker and more defined. The room fell completely silent as the SEALs processed what they were seeing. This is the insignia of Task Force Vanguard, Thornhill stated, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority. A joint special operations unit that existed for 7 years and officially never existed at all. The silence deepened as the implications sank in. Task Force Vanguard was a whispered legend in special operations circles, a rumored ultra-classified unit that operated outside normal command structures on missions that could never be acknowledged. Only 9 operators ever served in Vanguard. Only 4 survived. Thornhill's voice became even more solemn. And only 2 are in this room right now. He turned to Elise, who stood perfectly still, her face betraying nothing. Major Harrington wasn't just Vanguard's combat medic. She was its XO and the architect of infiltration strategies that your current playbook is based on, though you'd never know it because those missions remain classified beyond your clearance level. The SEAL's expressions cycled through disbelief, shock, and finally dawning comprehension as they reassessed everything they thought they knew about the woman they had mocked. Thornhill continued, his gaze sweeping across the now stunned operators. In 2013, Operation Blackfish inserted a 6-person team into territory so classified, I'd have to kill everyone in this room if I named it. That team was pinned down for 72 hours. 4 operators sustained critical injuries that should have been fatal. His eyes locked onto Bracken, who seemed to physically shrink under the general's gaze. All survived because of a combat medic who refused to let them die, who performed procedures that rewrote what we thought possible under battlefield conditions. Thornhill turned to Riker next. In Kavashk, when our extraction was compromised and we had operators down with arterial bleeds in 3 different locations, Major Harrington performed battlefield surgery under active fire for 4 hours. When our supplies ran out, she improvised using enemy weapons parts and local materials. The room remained completely silent, the SEALs now staring at Elise with entirely new eyes. The infiltration strategy your team used in Operation Silverback last year, the one that got you that Navy Cross, Commander, Thornhill addressed Riker directly. It was based on a Vanguard technique developed by Major Harrington during operations you'll never have clearance to know about. Commander Riker's face had drained of color, the full weight of his misjudgment becoming painfully clear. Lieutenant Bracken looked physically ill, the realization of who he had been mocking hitting him with full force. In a move that stunned the assembled SEALs, General Thornhill stepped away from his position and rendered a perfect salute to Elise. "The floor is yours again, Major, and I believe these gentlemen owe you their complete attention." For a long moment, the room remained frozen. Then, as one, every SEAL present stood and came to attention, facing Elise with the respect they had withheld only minutes before. Elise nodded once to Thornhill, acknowledging what he had done, then turned back to the presentation screen. "Let's continue with the Lazarus Protocol," she said, her voice unchanged, as if the revelation had altered nothing about her approach. Page 16 in your materials shows the modified field surgical kit. As she resumed her presentation, the SEALs watched her with new eyes, seeing now what they had missed before. The subtle indicators of someone who had operated at the highest levels. The precision in her movements wasn't academic. It was the economy of motion that comes from performing under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The clinical detachment in her voice wasn't inexperience. It was the hard-won emotional control of someone who had made life and death decisions while bullets flew. When she demonstrated techniques again, no one laughed at her tattoo. Instead, several unconsciously touched their own forearms, as if imagining what it would mean to bear that symbol and the experiences it represented. Lieutenant Bracken, who had been the most vocal in his mockery, now watched with an expression of profound regret mixed with awe. When Elise called for questions after demonstrating a particularly complex procedure, he raised his hand hesitantly. "Major," he began, his voice noticeably more respectful. "Could you elaborate on the application of this technique in limited visibility conditions?" Elise answered his question with the same professional detachment she had maintained throughout, offering no indication that this was the same man who had led the mockery against her. Her focus remained entirely on the material, on ensuring these operators understood techniques that might someday save their lives or the lives of their teammates. As the session concluded, the SEALs remained seated, no one eager to be the first to leave. The atmosphere had transformed from skeptical dismissal to something approaching reverence, though Elise herself seemed unchanged by the revelation of her identity. General Thornhill stood once more. "Gentlemen, what you have learned today about Major Harrington and Task Force Vanguard falls under the highest classification levels. This information does not leave this room. You are not to discuss it amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," filled the room. Tomorrow's session will focus on practical application of the protocols Major Harrington has outlined today. I expect each of you to arrive prepared to demonstrate your understanding of the material presented thus far. As the SEALs filed out, their earlier bravado had been replaced by a newfound solemnity. Several nodded respectfully to Elise as they passed, though none quite met her eyes, perhaps out of shame for their previous behavior, or simply awe at what they had learned about her service record. Captain Levesque remained behind, approaching Elise as she gathered her materials. "Major, my brother served in intelligence support for Vanguard. He never mentioned names, but he said the unit's combat medic was the most remarkable operator he'd ever encountered." Elise looked up, studying Levesque for a moment. "Your brother should still be more careful with operational security, Captain. He said you saved his life too, though he wasn't supposed to be there. April 2014, Operation Stillwater." For the first time, a hint of genuine emotion crossed Elise's features. "Martin Levesque, I didn't make the connection. He still has the scar where you performed emergency surgery during the exfil. He said you used a pocket knife and bootlaces when the medkit ran out." "You use what you have," Elise replied simply. "That's what the Lazarus Protocol is about. Saving lives with whatever resources are available." The energy in the briefing room the following morning was dramatically transformed. SEALs arrived early, each taking their seats with a newfound solemnity. When Elise entered, the room immediately fell silent, all eyes following her with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and lingering embarrassment. "Good morning," she began, her demeanor unchanged by yesterday's revelations. "Today, we'll focus on practical applications of the Lazarus Protocol under combat conditions. I've set up 5 stations around the room for hands-on training with the modified equipment." Commander Riker, who had led the mockery of Elise just 2 days earlier, raised his hand with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Major Harrington, on behalf of my team, I want to extend our sincere apologies for our unprofessional behavior. There is no excuse for how we conducted ourselves." Elise regarded him steadily. "The protocol is what matters, Commander," she replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology. "If your men implement it correctly, it will save lives. That's the only thing I came here to accomplish." Her response seemed to affect the SEALs more deeply than any angry rebuke might have. The professionalism with which she set aside their behavior to focus on the mission reflected the very qualities they most respected in their own community. As the practical session progressed, the operators engaged with unexpected enthusiasm, applying themselves to mastering the techniques with the focused intensity they typically reserved for weapons training or tactical exercises. Elise moved among them, providing guidance and corrections with precise efficiency. Lieutenant Bracken, working with a complex chest seal application, struggled with a particular technique. Where once he might have abandoned the effort or dismissed the method, he now asked quietly for additional instruction. "I'm not getting the seal properly aligned, Major. Could you demonstrate again?" Elise knelt beside him, guiding his hands through the correct procedure. "Feel the rib margins here. The placement needs to be precise to prevent tension pneumothorax during evacuation." You developed this technique during Vanguard operations? He asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Focus on the procedure, Lieutenant, she replied, though not unkindly. The origin matters less than the application. Across the room, Commander Riker successfully completed a difficult arterial clamping technique on a high-fidelity simulator. The pressure distribution is remarkable, he observed to General Thornhill, who was observing nearby. This would have made a critical difference during our Koringal operation last year. That's precisely why the Lazarus Protocol was prioritized for implementation, Thornhill replied. Too many good operators lost to preventable field trauma. Sir, Riker began hesitantly, may I ask about Vanguard? Not classified details, just, was it really as significant as the rumors suggest? Thornhill considered the question carefully. Vanguard operated in spaces between conventional warfare and traditional special operations. The unit pioneered approaches that now form the backbone of your standard playbook, though those origins were deliberately obscured for operational security. He glanced toward Elise, who was demonstrating a technique to another group of SEALs. What you need to understand about Major Harrington is that she wasn't just the unit's medic. She was the tactical innovator who designed infiltration strategies that are now taught at every special operations school in the country, though her name was removed from the materials. And the tattoo, sir, what does it represent? A promise, Thornhill said simply. One that only 9 operators ever made, and only 4 survived to honor. As the training session concluded, the atmosphere had transformed completely from skeptical dismissal to profound respect. SEALs who had laughed at Elise 2 days earlier now sought her guidance on specific techniques, their questions reflecting genuine professional interest rather than challenge. Captain Levesque approached Elise as the operators began to disperse for lunch. The response has been remarkable, Major. I've never seen a group of SEALs reverse course so completely. It's not about me, Captain, Elise replied, organizing her materials with characteristic precision. It's about recognizing the value of the protocol. General Thornhill's intervention simply eliminated an obstacle to implementation. Is that why you didn't identify yourself from the beginning? You could have avoided the disrespect. Respect granted due to rank or reputation is fundamentally different from respect earned through demonstrated value, Elise said. The protocol needed to stand on its merits, not my service record. In the officers' mess hall, the contrast with 2 days earlier couldn't have been more striking. Where Elise had previously sat alone, subjected to mockery from nearby tables, now Commander Riker approached with his tray. May I join you, Major? He asked formally. Elise nodded, and Riker sat across from her. Other SEALs soon followed, filling the table that had been conspicuously empty around her before. The conversation remained professional, focused primarily on applications of the protocol to specific combat scenarios they had encountered. The modified chest seal would have made a critical difference during our extraction from the compound in Helmand last year, one SEAL observed. We lost Jensen to tension pneumothorax during the helo evacuation. That specific modification was developed after a similar loss during Operation Blackfish, Elise replied. Sometimes the most valuable innovations come from our failures rather than our successes. If I may ask, Major, Riker said carefully, how did Vanguard operate without the support infrastructure we rely on? The protocol seems designed for situations with minimal resources. That was our operational reality, she acknowledged. Vanguard missions typically involved extended deployment in denied areas with no possibility of rapid evacuation or resupply. We adapted by developing protocols that maximized effectiveness with minimal resources. The conversation continued, gradually shifting from purely professional exchange to something approaching mutual respect. The SEALs began to see Elise not as an outsider, but as a fellow operator who had faced challenges they could only imagine. As the final training session concluded, General Thornhill addressed the assembled team. The Lazarus Protocol will be formally implemented across all Special Operations units, effective immediately. Your team will serve as the initial cadre responsible for training your fellow operators in these techniques. He turned to Elise. Major Harrington will remain available for consultation during the implementation phase, but the ownership of this protocol now transfers to you. Its success or failure will be determined by how effectively you incorporate it into your operational planning. In a move that surprised everyone present, Commander Riker stepped forward. Major Harrington, on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Group 2, I'd like to present you with this. He handed her a unit coin, a special token typically reserved for those who had served directly with the team. This doesn't begin to address our initial reception, but we hope you'll accept it as a token of our professional respect and gratitude. Elise accepted the coin with a nod. Thank you, Commander. The true measure of the protocol's value will be in the lives it saves, not in any recognition I might receive. As the SEALs filed out, each nodded respectfully to Elise. Lieutenant Bracken, the last to leave, paused briefly. Major, I was the most vocal in my disrespect. I want to know that I recognize the magnitude of my error in judgment, and I'll work to ensure the protocol is implemented exactly as you've designed it. The protocol isn't perfect, Lieutenant, Elise replied. It will evolve with field experience. Your feedback from operational implementation will be essential to that evolution. After everyone had departed, only Elise and General Thornhill remained in the briefing room. Was the revelation necessary, Marcus? She asked, using his first name for the first time since arriving at the facility. You know it was, he replied. The protocol wouldn't have been properly implemented without their complete buy-in. Sometimes respect for the messenger is a prerequisite for accepting the message. 6 months later, the Lazarus Protocol had been fully implemented across all SEAL teams, with early field reports confirming its effectiveness. A memorial wall in the training facility had been updated to include a small, discreet symbol, the Vanguard insignia, beside the names of operators lost in classified operations. Elise, now working directly with the military's Medical Research Division, received a report on her desk detailing the protocol's first major success in the field. Commander Riker's team had encountered a complex ambush during extraction. 2 operators sustained critical injuries that under previous protocols would likely have been fatal. Both survived because of the Lazarus techniques. Captain Levesque entered Elise's office, carrying additional field reports. 3 more confirmed saves last month in the Horn of Africa. Arterial damage that would have been fatal under the old procedures. That's good to hear, Elise replied, reviewing the technical details with professional interest. I've recommended you for the Distinguished Service Medal, Levesque continued, for your contributions to special operations medicine. That's not necessary, Captain. Maybe not, but it's deserved. Later that week, a new class of SEAL candidates received their initial medical training. The instructor, a former member of Riker's team, rolled up his sleeve to demonstrate a procedure. On his forearm was a fresh tattoo, not identical to the Vanguard symbol, but clearly inspired by it, modified to honor the original, while indicating his status as part of a new generation carrying forward its legacy. This protocol was developed by one of the finest warriors and medical minds in special operations history. He told the candidates, "You may never hear her name. You may never know the full story, but every life you save using these techniques is part of her legacy." Meanwhile, at Naval Special Warfare Command, Commander Riker met with General Thornhill to review the quarterly operational statistics. Casualty survival rates are up 36% across all teams, Riker reported. The Lazarus Protocol has fundamentally changed our approach to combat medicine. And the cultural impact? Thornhill asked. Riker considered the question carefully. Profound, sir. The revelation about Major Harrington forced us to confront assumptions we didn't even realize we were making. It's changed how we evaluate expertise, regardless of its source. That was always part of the objective, Thornhill acknowledged. The protocol itself is invaluable, but the lesson in judgment may prove equally important in the long run. We've incorporated elements of the Vanguard approach into our standard tactical training, Riker added. Not just the medical protocols, but the adaptive methodology Major Harrington pioneered. Our operational effectiveness has increased significantly as a result. She'll be pleased to hear that, Thornhill said, though she'd never admit it. In her office, Elise reviewed plans for the next generation of the Lazarus protocol, incorporating feedback from the field implementations. On her wall hung a single photograph, a team of operators with faces blurred for security, standing in an unidentifiable desert landscape. Only their arms were clear, each bearing the same geometric tattoo that had once made her a target of ridicule and now made her a legend within the special operations community. Beside the photo was the unit coin Riker had presented to her, alongside a framed quote. "The highest honor is in the lives saved, not the recognition received." A knock at her door revealed Lieutenant Bracken, now attached to the Medical Training Division. "Major, we've compiled the first comprehensive data set from field implementation of the Lazarus protocol. The results exceed even our most optimistic projections." "Excellent. Have you identified any areas for improvement?" "Several. The chest seal application has been modified based on field experience in high-altitude operations, and the arterial clamping technique has been streamlined for application with minimal assistance." "Evolution through application." Elise nodded approvingly. "That's exactly how it should work." "There's something else, Major," Bracken added hesitantly. "The teams have unofficially named the arterial stabilization technique the Harrington method. It's entered the operational lexicon." For the first time, a hint of genuine emotion crossed Elise's features, a brief glimpse of the person behind the professional facade. "The name doesn't matter, Lieutenant. The lives saved do." "With respect, Major, sometimes names do matter," Bracken replied. "They help us remember where things came from and why they're important." As he departed, Elise returned to her work, continuing the endless process of refinement and improvement that had defined her entire career. What had begun as a moment of public humiliation had transformed into a catalyst for institutional change, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to adversity isn't retaliation, but innovation. The legacy of that moment extended far beyond a single officer or training facility, representing a fundamental shift in how special operations evaluated expertise and innovation, ensuring that future generations of operators would benefit from the best ideas, regardless of their source. As new recruits continued their training at facilities across the country, they learned techniques bearing Elise's influence without knowing her name. But within the special operations community, the geometric tattoo had taken on new meaning, a symbol of respect for those who serve without recognition, whose contributions save lives in ways that can never be publicly acknowledged. General Thornhill, watching this transformation unfold, reflected on the 9 operators who had originally worn that symbol, and the 4 who had survived to carry its legacy forward. What had begun as a classified unit designator had evolved into something more profound, a reminder that true valor often remains unseen, its impact measured not in public accolades, but in the lives touched and the standards forever changed. In the shadowed corridors of judgment and hidden scars, the story of Major Elise Harrington teaches us a profound lesson. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those who bear unseen battles, for true valor often hides behind a facade of composure, waiting to reveal its depth when least expected. Like Elise, enduring mockery from elite warriors who dismissed her expertise based on superficial assumptions. We all encounter moments where prejudice blinds us to another's worth, whether in workplaces, relationships, or daily life. Her faded tattoo, a symbol of classified heroism and sacrifices in forgotten wars, reminds us that real heroes don't boast. They innovate, persevere, and save lives without seeking applause. The SEAL's transformation from ridicule to reverence mirrors our own potential for growth. By confronting biases, we open doors to empathy, respect, and life-changing wisdom. It's a heartfelt call to look beyond appearances, to value substance over stereotypes, because in doing so, we not only honor others, but heal our own narrow visions. Imagine the regrets of hasty judgments. How many opportunities or connections have we lost? Elisa's unyielding focus on the mission, turning humiliation into legacy, inspires us to respond to adversity with grace and purpose, proving that quiet resilience can reshape worlds. This tale stirs the soul, urging us to embrace humility and curiosity in every interaction. What hidden strengths have you discovered in someone you once underestimated? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how this lesson resonates with you. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button for more untold tales of courage and inspiration that touch the heart and challenge the mind. Together, let's celebrate the unsung heroes among us.